Now this one comes from Ravi Zacharias, and even though he doesn't appear, you can feel his absurdity throughout. Zacharias is an Indian-born, Canadian-American evangelical preacher who has written tons of books, all of them ridiculous religious pap. Unfortunately, he's got a lot of clueless followers, and we're about to see that cluelessness on display as they try to answer the question, can you prove God exists?
Sometimes we're asked the question, can we prove the existence of God? And, it's a strange idea because in one sense, there's a moral intuition that something exists. Like Immanuel Kant talked about two great realities that basically inspired him, the starry heavens above, the moral law within. So there was a basic awareness. And I remember that even as a child, I didn't overtly believe in a God that I followed, but I believed that there was a God out there. It was almost like there was some sense.
Yeah, not so much. I find it funny that in all of these apologetics videos, the ones where they ask if you can prove God, the first thing they talk about is, I have this feeling. Come on, if that's the best you can do, just be honest and answer the question before you. Say no. You cannot prove God. These apologists need to be honest with themselves and everyone else. There is no evidence for God. There is no proof for God. There are just these vague feelings and wishful thinking that make them want God to exist, and that's not proof. That's pathetic.
So can we prove that God exists? I think there are evidential trails, but not proof in the sense of a mathematical proof like 2 + 2 = 4. I think what we use is a sense of arguments that look for what we call the argument towards the best fit. Cumulative case arguments. So we look at various things like in a murder case or a case trying to prove the issue of the guilt of someone in a crime. You have to gather evidence from many different pieces, and the cumulative case argument adds up. In that sense, I think we can point towards the existence of God, the probabilities, but it's not the same as a mathematical proof.
If you walked into a courtroom and presented all of these supposed lines of evidence, you'd get laughed out of the room. You can't just tell the judge that you have a feeling that Joe Blow killed John Doe. You can't just say that some voice in your head told you that Joe Blow killed John Doe. You can't just tell the court that you have an old book of primitive mythology that says Joe Blow killed John Doe. None of these things would stand up for a moment. In fact, if you weren't carted away in a straitjacket, you'd at least be held in contempt of court for pulling any of this crap in the first place. This is where Christian apologetics fail, but the apologists themselves are just not honest enough to admit it.
If by prove we mean equating it with 100% certainty, then no, we cannot prove with 100% certainty the existence of God. But is the existence of God the most probable explanation for all that is? I think we have reasons, we have arguments that have come down through history that make the reasonableness of God and God's existence very, very probable and likely.
Then why do all these arguments fail to stand up under even the most cursory evaluation? Why is it so ridiculously easy to poke holes in these supposed arguments that have come down through history, especially when most of these arguments were rejected by critical thinkers hundreds of years ago, yet the apologists are still using them like they're anything but flimsy excuses for blind fanatical faith? These are not things to be proud of. These are things you should be embarrassed by.
What do we mean when we say prove? Everyone should have a certain level of certainty that they're looking for, and 100% certainty is just out of the question. We can't be 100% certain that we even exist. We can't have 100% certainty that we're even here when we're talking from a philosophical standpoint. So the question is, how much certainty are you willing to have before you act or believe something? And that's what we need to come up with, thresholds of certainty. What is the most coherent explanation? What's the best explanation for the world around us? And if we look at it from that perspective, as we do everything in life, then we can have very good reason to believe that God exists.
But that's not how things work. Yes, we can never have absolute certainty of anything. That is beyond our ability for any position. But likewise, we can't just throw up our hands and say that because we cannot ever be absolutely certain, we just get to pick anything that makes us feel good and declare that it has to be true because our standards are so absurdly low that we're willing to go with just about anything. The reality is, if we're going to be critical thinkers, as these apologists certainly are not, but if we are, we have to be willing to say that if no answer comes up to our standard of proof, then we simply do not take a position at all. We say we don't know. We keep looking. That's not something that these apologists are willing to do. They want to believe things right now, whether they have any good reason to accept it as factually true or not. If we see a tree that's fallen over in the woods and we want an explanation for why it fell, we can't just pretend that Bigfoot did it because we have no other likely explanations. Making stuff up is not rational.
Most of the time when people ask that kind of a question, they're looking for the type of proof that we really only find in mathematics and maybe some of the hard sciences. But that type of proof is really not necessary, it's not even helpful when we are trying to determine whether or not God exists and what our relationship with Him should be. What is more interesting is whether or not we can come to know that God exists and whether we can really have a relationship with Him. And that is not a difficult question to answer, because the answer is yes. God has revealed Himself to us in the person of Jesus Christ.
And where is your evidence for that? If Jesus was an actual historical figure that did all the things that the Bible says that He did and was the Son of God, then yes, we ought to be able to come up with solid, objective evidence for any of it. We can't. And if we can't, then your assertion that you have a relationship with this mythical individual is absurd. It's like saying you have a personal relationship with Santa Claus. I think it's interesting that all of these apologists, every single one, is making excuses for why they really have nothing. And then they're just saying, well, I have reasons. Where are they? Present them. Make a credible argument. Of course, none of them actually can. Nor do they really try. Sorry, in logical discourse, it isn't the thought that counts.
Well, I believe we attempt to prove God's existence or argue for God's existence because the evidence is so strong. It's so compelling that it seems almost illogical to argue against God's existence. So again, if somebody sets out to prove God's existence with 100% certainty, they're likely to be disappointed. But if they set out to show the reasonableness for the existence of God, then I think there are very strong arguments that can be made, and we can have some degree of satisfaction with that. There is grounding, there is a foundation for belief in God.
If the argument is so strong, if the evidence is so compelling, why can none of you actually present a credible argument or a shred of objective evidence? Why are you failing so pathetically all the time? See, this is why they fail, because they aren't setting out to look for the evidence and find the truth. They're just pretending that they already have the truth, a truth that makes them feel good, and then cherry-picking supposed evidence that supports it while ignoring the quite clear fact that none of that evidence is impressive or especially valid. It's just wishful thinking and dream fulfillment. This is a clear example of cognitive dissonance. They hold up what supports their existing beliefs, no matter how tenuously, and ignore anything that shows that their beliefs are patently empty. That's why skeptics just shake their heads at this kind of blind faith and pointless apologetics. There's nothing of substance here. These people are dancing around, waving their arms, proclaiming that the emperor has a beautiful set of new clothes when everyone else can clearly see the poor guy is naked. Except in this case, there is no emperor, and the apologist is wearing a mental straitjacket. It always surprises me just how blinded the religious are by their fanatical beliefs. Honestly, they come off like petulant children. Skeptics ask if they can prove their God exists, and then they hem and they haw and they make excuses for why they really have nothing of substance to present. But they're damn sure it all has to be real, even though they've got no demonstrable reason to think so. It's like children arguing over the existence of Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, but at least they get presents and colored eggs. What can the religious hold up as proof of their claims? Not a damn thing. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe below. And please, when you see these crazy apologists making these empty claims, point out to them where they fail and why nobody is impressed. They won't listen, but at least you tried, and maybe you'll even get a chuckle out of it.